Welcome to the channel. Today you will hear the story of a woman whose name became a symbol of progress, but behind her greatness lay letters she was never meant to read. Secret love, betrayal, personal demons, and the burden of power, all of it became woven into the fate of Eleanor Roosevelt. In the autumn of 1918, in a house haunted by the ghosts of reputation and public opinion, the young wife of an American politician happened to open her husband's suitcase. She was looking for nothing more than clean shirts, but instead stumbled upon a bundle of letters. They were neatly tied with a ribbon, as though they were meant not for eyes, but for memory. Curiosity won, and with the very first line, something far greater than a marital crisis began. Those letters marked the beginning of a rebirth. The words destroyed her illusions, but gave her something far greater: freedom. Freedom from expectations, from fear, from the role imposed on her since childhood. And so was born the real Eleanor Roosevelt, not just a president's wife, but the voice of America, unafraid to speak loudly even when the entire White House whispered. But to understand how she traveled the path from forgotten girl to the most influential woman of the 20th century, we must go back to the beginning. To the opulent salons of New York, where smiles were false and the coldness was real. To a childhood where mirrors reflected not dreams but reproach, where a mother called you plain and a father was too drunk to protect you. And then you realize, to become someone, you must first survive. Eleanor did, at the cost of pain, loss, and secret truths she carried across decades. This story is not only about power, but also about betrayal. Not only about love, but about the fight to be one's self. Are you ready to hear her story as it was kept hidden? Then buckle up. We're heading into the past, where behind the First Lady's facade lived the woman America knew the least. When we think of great figures, we often imagine a confident beginning. But Eleanor Roosevelt was born not into light, but into shadow. Though her name belonged to one of America's most powerful families, she felt like a stranger in her own home. On October 11, 1884, in a wealthy Manhattan townhouse, a baby girl with large, slightly sad eyes was born. She was named Anna Eleanor. Her mother, the beautiful and cold Anna Hall, a descendant of the old Livingston family, belonged to high society and was used to life in refined drawing rooms. She was elegant, poised, and merciless. When Eleanor was only a few years old, her mother began calling her Granny for her shyness, her stoop, her awkwardness, and she would say, "You'll never be a beauty, dear." That dear sounded like a slap. Perhaps Eleanor could have endured that chill if she hadn't adored the man who was her son, her father. Elliot Roosevelt, younger brother of the future President Theodore Roosevelt, was everything her mother was not: warm, playful, full of life. He would hoist her onto his shoulders and tell her she was special. But he was also something else. He drank. He had outbursts. He vanished. He lied. He was banished from the family, and then from the country, officially for treatment, but truly to remove the disgrace. Eleanor waited for letters. Sometimes they came, until one day they didn't. When she was 8, her mother died of diphtheria. A cold coffin replaced a cold love. 2 years later, her father died. He had been forbidden from returning to New York, but tried anyway, and broke his spine in a drunken fight. At first, they hid it from her. Then they told her, "Your father is dead." She didn't cry. She just went quiet. She was 10. An orphan with unprocessed grief, Eleanor was sent to live with her maternal grandmother, Mary Livingston. It was a house where love was replaced by rules. No crying, no loud laughter, no hope. The girl with the shadowed face learned to be invisible. She learned to listen, to obey, to not interfere. But in that silence, a strength was forming, one she would later wield like a weapon. Back then, at the close of the 19th century, she had no idea she would become a symbol of freedom. She had only one thing: she wanted to escape. At 15, she went to England to attend Allenswood, a girls' finishing school. And there, for the first time in her life, she felt seen. The school was run by Marie Sauvestre, a fiery Frenchwoman and fierce believer in independent thought. She saw not just Eleanor's mind, but the fury that simmered beneath her fear. Sauvestre taught her to argue, to speak confidently, to defend her opinions, to believe in herself. Far from America, Eleanor finally began to breathe. When she returned home 3 years later, the family met not the granny they used to mock, but a young woman with a straight spine and light in her eyes. But America expected something else: marriage, children, and silence on political matters. Everything she had gained, self-respect, a voice, a will, had to be tucked away beneath the lace of polite society. And then, as if by design, he returned to her life. Her 5 years older cousin, now grown, ambitious, tall, and flashing a radiant smile, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was charismatic, charming, and carried the easy allure of inherited success. And as it turned out, he was captivated by her. But while Eleanor saw in him a partner, he saw in her a calm harbor, a wife who would support, stand by, smile when needed, and ask no questions. Their romance was restrained, almost shy, but in 1905 they married. President Teddy Roosevelt, Franklin's uncle, gave the bride away. Everything looked perfect. But Eleanor, who had walked through darkness, already knew perfection is a myth. And she did not yet know that 13 years later, she would find those very letters, and her life would change all over again. Their 1905 wedding seemed like fate's gift: a rising political star with a brilliant future, and a quiet, thoughtful bride from the same great family. He, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the dashing nephew of the president. She, Eleanor, the serious descendant of aristocracy. People said they completed each other. They said she would be his rock. No one asked if that's what she wanted. At first, it all looked like a happy idyll. They had 6 children, 5 of whom survived into adulthood. Eleanor ran the household, raised the children, accompanied her husband to social events, learned to smile when she wanted to vanish. Though outwardly fulfilling society's expectations, she often felt invisible. But she stayed silent. The years passed. Franklin climbed the political ladder, took on important roles, traveled to meetings, conferences, receptions. She stayed home, with the children, with her insecurities, with her notebooks filled with thoughts she never shared. He was like a star, bright, in demand, radiant. She, a shadow, his shadow. Everything changed in 1918. Franklin returned from Europe after a trip related to the First World War. He was ill. Eleanor, caring wife, unpacked his things, searching for shirts, undergarments, papers. And then she saw them. The letters. A bundle tied carefully. They were from Lucy Mercer, a young, attractive woman, once Eleanor's own secretary. She read them. Every word sliced deep. There was tenderness, declarations, promises, everything Franklin hadn't said to her in years. Her breath caught, her hands shook, but she stayed silent, at first. Then she spoke. For the first time, not as a wife, but as a woman. She confronted him with the letters. He was stunned, begged for forgiveness, swore it was over. Franklin's powerful mother, Sarah Delano Roosevelt, sided with Eleanor, not out of love, but because divorce would ruin her son's career. She needed a family, not a scandal. Eleanor made demands. She would no longer be an accessory. She wanted to be herself. He promised the affair was finished. He promised. But did he keep that promise? This betrayal didn't break her. It freed her. She realized if she was to stand beside a man who lived his own life, she would live hers too. From that moment on, she began rebuilding herself. She joined the League of Women Voters, started giving speeches, writing, teaching, connecting with activists, reformers, fighters for civil rights. She began shaping her own agenda, becoming the voice for women tired of silence. When Franklin was struck by polio in 1921 and left paralyzed, Eleanor didn't leave. She cared for him, stood by him, not as a shadow, but as an equal. More than that, she became his eyes and ears in politics. She attended meetings, listened to people's fears, dreams, and pain. That's when she truly found her voice. By the mid-1920s, she was already recognized as a force in her own right. When Franklin decided to re-enter big politics, no one doubted, without Eleanor, he couldn't succeed. She didn't just push him forward, she was walking beside him.
But even then, Franklin remained unfaithful. It would later be revealed that he had continued his secret correspondence with Lucy Mercer. More than that, when he lay dying in Warm Springs in 1945, it was not Eleanor who was by his side, but Lucy. But that's still ahead, for now Eleanor was transforming, from wounded wife to independent power, from the woman left behind to the one now counted. And when Franklin Delano Roosevelt became president in 1933, America didn't gain just one leader, it gained two. 1933. Franklin Delano Roosevelt is sworn in as the 32nd President of the United States. America is in the grip of the Great Depression. Stock markets have collapsed, banks are shutting down, families are losing their homes, and thousands line up for bread. And in that moment, a woman moves into the White House. A woman no one expected and no one could predict. Eleanor Roosevelt, First Lady. A title that once meant quiet support and perfectly served teas. But Eleanor had no intention of sitting quietly behind rose-colored wallpaper. She had known pain, she had seen poverty, and she did not want to be a symbol of privilege. She wanted to be a symbol of hope. From the very beginning, she broke protocol. She didn't just accompany her husband, she held press conferences. For women only. Why? Because female journalists weren't allowed at White House events. Eleanor changed that. She forced newspapers to hire women if they wanted to cover her. She traveled, not in white gloves with cocktails in hand, but in third-class train cars to dusty towns, farms, mining camps. She listened, not to reporters, but to real people. And she wrote, every single day, a column called My Day, published in hundreds of newspapers. She didn't talk about dinner menus. She talked about unemployment, racism, homelessness, injustice. She wrote as if her readers weren't diplomats, but store clerks, farmers, and housewives, because they were the ones she heard. The political establishment didn't know what to do with her. Some whispered, she's meddling. Others, she's gone too far. Still others, she's destroying femininity. But she kept going. In 1939, when African-American singer Marian Anderson was denied the stage at Constitution Hall because of her race, Eleanor cut ties with the DAR, the organization responsible. She didn't just resign in protest. She made sure Anderson sang on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial before 75,000 people. It was a moment that told America the First Lady could be not just a companion, but a force. But behind that force still stood a woman plagued by doubt. Her marriage remained formal, Franklin lived his own life. Between them remained respect and partnership, but the passion was long gone. Eleanor craved closeness, warmth, sometimes understanding. And then she met her, Lorena Hickok, a journalist, sharp, alive, fiercely independent. A bond grew between them, one Eleanor never paraded but never entirely concealed either. Their letters, hundreds of pages, overflowed with tenderness, longing, desire. Were they lovers? No historian can say with certainty, but one thing is clear. Hickok was the person who saw Eleanor.
Eleanor didn't fear scandal. Scandals feared her. She pushed for justice, even when it hurt her husband's popularity. She stood up for women in unions, fought for equal pay, championed civil rights. She walked into rooms where women had never been allowed, and she didn't just stand there. She spoke, clearly, boldly, without apology. Some called her naive, others dangerous, but no one could call her irrelevant. And when Franklin won an unprecedented 4 terms, the country knew this wasn't just a presidential couple. These were 2 leaders, one at the podium, one in the hearts of the people. During World War II, Eleanor became more than a symbol of inner strength. She visited military hospitals, flew to Pacific Islands, sat with soldiers who were dying not from bullets, but from loneliness. She wrote to them, listened to their fears. She went where even generals hesitated to go. And all the while, critics attacked her. Her voice, her teeth, her looks, her refusal to stay in her lane. But that was her lane. She was never perfect, but she was real, honest, stubborn, awkward, funny, deep. A woman who decided that silence was no longer an option. April 12, 1945, Warm Springs, Georgia. At noon, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was painting at his easel. He felt tired, but no one expected tragedy. Suddenly, he clutched his head, whispered, "I have a terrible headache," and collapsed. He never spoke again. When Eleanor learned of his death, she wasn't with him. She hadn't been invited. Later, she would find out who had been there. Lucy Mercer. Her. The woman who had shattered her illusions once before. The woman he had perhaps never stopped loving. But Eleanor was no longer the trembling girl undone by a letter. She received the news calmly, gathered her things, returned to Washington, and addressed the nation, not as a widow, but as a leader. For many, her mission could have ended there. She had been First Lady longer than anyone. She had guided the country through the Great Depression and the Second World War. She could have retired, written memoirs, played with grandchildren. But that was not Eleanor's way. In 1946, President Harry Truman appointed her U.S. delegate to the brand new United Nations. The greatest woman in America, he called her. And he wasn't wrong. On the global stage, among diplomats, monarchs, dictators, and powerful men, Eleanor shone anew. She chaired the Commission on Human Rights. And it was Eleanor Roosevelt who stood at the birth of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the very document still quoted around the world in defense of dignity and freedom. She argued. She negotiated. She persuaded. Sometimes alone against dozens. Sometimes with her fists clenched beneath the table. But she prevailed. In 1948, the Declaration passed. It was her triumph. Not as a wife, not as a shadow, as a human being. In her later years, she wrote books, met with students, traveled, supported new leaders, new causes. Even in her 80s, she remained a voice of reason, conscience, defiance. Her health declined. She fought anemia, bone tuberculosis, and a severe infection. She grew tired, but never gave up. She died on November 7, 1962, in her New York apartment. Her children were with her, her grandchildren, her letters, silence. Thousands came to say goodbye.
from presidents to postmen, because she had spoken to all of them, not from above, not from a podium, but beside them. She didn't die an icon. She died a living, breathing human whose life story was messy, but true. The woman once called ugly became the face on a coin. The woman betrayed by her husband became the most respected figure of the 20th century. The woman they feared changed the world. And if today you believe in equality, if you think truth matters more than power, if you dare to be yourself even when it's uncomfortable, then maybe, just maybe, you still hear her voice. The voice of Eleanor.